One of the most popular slogans of Marxism is, "From each according to his ability, to each according to his need." That is the cornerstone of theoretical socialism, and it is a very appealing concept, but it is incomplete. The unanswered question is, how is this to be accomplished? Shall it be in freedom or through coercion? For the individualist, a worthy objective does not justify committing theft and surrendering freedom, while for the collectivist, the ends justify the means. In the next part of this series, we examine equality and inequality under law. We will study how collectivists use government for welfare and to enforce racial or gender quotas in order to bring about a more equal society, and also the opposite view of individualism, that regardless of personal inequalities of means or circumstance, we all deserve the same equality under the law. The next concept that divides collectivism from individualism has to do with the way that people are treated under the law. Individualists believe that no two people are exactly alike, and that each one is superior or inferior to others in a huge variety of ways, but that under the law, they should all be treated equally. Collectivists believe that the law should treat people unequally in order to bring about desirable changes in society. They view the world as tragically imperfect. They see poverty and suffering and injustice, and they conclude that something must be done to alter the forces that have produced these effects. They think of themselves as social engineers who have the wisdom to restructure society to a more humane and logical order. To do this, they must interfere in the affairs of men at all levels and redirect their activities according to the master plan. That means they must redistribute wealth and use the police power of the state to enforce prescribed behavior. The consequence of this mindset can be seen everywhere in society today. Almost every country in the world has a tax system designed to treat people unequally depending on their income, their marital status, the number of children they have, their age, and even the type of investments they may have. The purpose of this arrangement is to redistribute wealth, which means to favour some classes over others. In some cases, there are bizarre loopholes written into the tax laws just to favour one corporation or one politically influential group. Other laws provide tax exemption and subsidies to favoured groups or corporations. Inequality is the sole purpose of these laws. In the realm of social relationships, there are laws to establish racial quotas, gender quotas, affirmative action initiatives, and to prohibit expressions of opinion that may be objectionable to some group or to the master planners. In all of these measures, there is an unequal application of the law based on what group or class you happen to be in, or on what opinion you hold. We are told that all of this is necessary to accomplish a desirable change in society, and yet, after more than 100 years of social engineering, there is not one place on the globe where collectivists can point with pride and show where their master plan has actually worked as they predicted. Let us use an example of a basketball league, where some of the teams were forced during the last season to play with one arm tied behind their backs, while others could play without constraint. Of course, neither individualists nor collectivists would consider this arrangement fair. Now suppose that someone proposed for the next several seasons, those teams whose players had been untied were now to play all of their games with one arm tied behind their backs, while those who had been tied up now had both arms free. Is the arrangement now fair? Before we answer, let's improve the analogy. Let's observe that there has been a complete turnover of players. All those who played in the first set of games have retired. The current players, therefore, are newcomers, none of whom were involved in the original practice. Let's ask again, is the arrangement now fair? It is important to identify one crucial premise in this example. It identifies the players as individuals, rather than members of a collective team. Let us use a more contemporary example of groups who, historically, have had the rules of the game biased against them, such as the indigenous peoples of Australia and Canada, or the Native Americans of the United States. Their struggle has been against the racism and inequality that inhibits their opportunities. Both collectivists and individualists would agree that the rules of the game need to be changed so that they can play with both hands untied. But what would we say if collectivists went even further and changed the rules so that the ancestors of native people were guaranteed employment, given welfare payments, or even made exempt from paying taxes, just because they belong to the group, regardless of how well off the individual may be. In their quest for equal rights, is the collectivist strategy for swapping negative inequality for positive inequality likely to be successful? The individualist believes that this path breeds further resentment as it continues the fostering of a society that only sees each other as members of groups, eternally different and forever struggling for preferential treatment under the law at the expense of others. There have been many books written about the collectivist utopia, but they have never materialized in the real world. Wherever collectivism has been applied, the results have always been more poverty than before, more suffering than before, and certainly more injustice than before. Individualism is based on the premise that all citizens should be equal under law, regardless of their race, religion, gender, or political opinion. No class should be given preferential treatment, regardless of the merit or popularity of its cause. To favour one class over another is not equality under law. In the final part of this series, we explore the proper role of government. We look at the difference between an individualist and a collectivist state, and where each government will take its society.
Time has come to do away with all the confusing definitions, the illusion of opposites, and the myth that the world is too complicated to properly understand. All of these issues are far more simple than we could have imagined. There is the approach of collectivism and the approach of individualism. Now that we have examined the true origin of human rights, the fallacy of group supremacy, the immorality of using coercion, and the need for equality under law, one question remains. What is the proper role of government? Collectivists believe that the proper role of government should be positive, that the state should take the initiative in all aspects of the affairs of men, that it should be aggressive, lead, and provide. It should be the great organizer of society. Individualists believe that the proper function of government is negative and defensive. It is not to provide, but to protect. For if the state is granted the power to provide for some, it must also be able to take from others. And once that power is granted, there are those who will seek it for their advantage. It always leads to legalized plunder and the loss of freedom. If the government is powerful enough to give us everything we want, it is also powerful enough to take from us everything we have. Therefore, the proper function of government is to protect the lives, liberty, and property of its citizens, and nothing more. We hear a lot today about right-wingers versus left-wingers, but what do these terms really mean? For example, we are told that communists and socialists are at the extreme left, and that Nazis and fascists are on the extreme right. Here we have this image of two powerful ideological adversaries pitted against each other, and the impression is that somehow they are opposites. But what is the difference? They are not opposites at all. They are the same. The insignias may be different, but when you analyze communism and Nazism, they both embody the principles of socialism. Communists are clear that they embody socialism, and the Nazi movement in Germany was actually called the National Socialist Party. Communists believe in international socialism, whereas Nazis advocate national socialism. Communists promote class hatred and class conflict to motivate loyalty and the blind obedience of their followers, whereas the Nazis use race conflict and race hatred to accomplish the same objective. Other than that, there is no difference between communism and Nazism. They are both the epitome of collectivism, and yet we are told that they are supposedly at opposite ends of the spectrum. There is only one thing that makes sense in constructing a political spectrum, and that is to put zero government at one end of the line and 100% at the other. Now we have something that we can comprehend. Those who believe in zero government are the anarchists, while those who believe in total government are the totalitarians. With that definition, we find that communism and Nazism are together at the same end. They are both totalitarian. Why? Because they are both based on the model of collectivism. Communism, Nazism, fascism and socialism all gravitate towards bigger and bigger government because that is the logical extension of their common ideology. Under collectivism, all problems are the responsibility of the state and must be solved by the state. The more problems there are, the more powerful the state must become. If you accept the principle that government must solve society's problems, you get on the slippery slope and there is no place to stop until you reach all the way to the end of the scale, which is total government. Regardless of what name you give it, regardless of how you relabel it to make it seem new or different, collectivism is totalitarianism. In fact, the straight line concept of a political spectrum is somewhat misleading. It is really a circle. You can take the straight line with 100% government at one end and 0 at the other, bend it round and touch the ends at the top. Now it is a circle because under anarchy, when there is no government, you have absolute rule by those with the biggest fists and the most powerful weapons. So you jump from 0 government to totalitarianism in a flash. They meet at the top. When dealing with a circle, the only logical place for us to be is somewhere in the middle of the extremes. We need social and political organisation, of course, but it must be built on individualism, an ideology with an affinity to that part of the spectrum with the least amount of government possible, instead of collectivism with an affinity at the other end of the spectrum with the most amount of government possible. That government is best which governs least.